All right, let's go. We're going to look at the lesson starting right at the top. The remarkable story of Moses and his leadership of Hebrew slaves and the deliverance from Egypt is well known, but the preamble is often overlooked. Often we know stories of the Bible. For example, Moses parted the Red Sea and he got the Ten Commandments, but we don't know what actually led up to that. It's the same as we hear of King David and King Saul, but we don't know the story that led up to the kings of Israel. That's why in my sermons I like to give you context. I like to tell you what came before the event that actually took place. Even in the life of Jesus, we see him doing something. For example, he was going across the sea in a storm, but we don't know that he just fed 5,000 people and he was tired for the day. So it's good to have context. And this is kind of the lesson. We're going to end with Moses, but we've got to find out what happened before that. And we're going to be covering many years of history, all the way from Abraham through to Moses. So let's start with the Abrahamic call. Abraham is called the father of faith because of his stance against heathenism and idol worship. After the deluge of Noah, the deluge is the flood, mankind drifted further into darkness. Abraham emerged as a champion who refused to be swept into the abyss of unbelief. He left the land of his birth. The Chaldeans were idol worshippers. So somewhere next to that, write you are of the Chaldees. Is a prominent city on the Euphrates River, around the same area as Babylon was, and that is where he was from. Abraham was called from an ancient city in modern-day Iraq. You'll be surprised. Everything happens in Iraq, modern-day Iraq. The Garden of Eden was in modern-day Iraq. Abraham was called from there. The Tower of Babel was in modern-day Iraq. I mean, so many things happen in modern-day Iraq. All right? It says, and traveled to a new land that the monotheistic God promised to him. Genesis 12 says this, now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So let's quickly look at that little block, that little insert there. It tells us a bit about the different beliefs of God. The first one is theism, coming from a Greek word theos. So write something on the page. Theos equals God. Theos is a Greek word that means God. G-O-D. All right. So if you're a theist, you believe in God. Not necessarily any specific God, but you believe in God. All right. An idea of God. Monotheism, mono means one. So if you put the words together, mono means one, and theos comes from theos, one God. All right, so that's how we put words together. So monotheism is one God. The Muslims believe in one God. The Jews believe in one God. They believe in their Yahweh. And Christians, I like to say, to a degree, also believe in one God. We know that we adhere to the Trinity. So it is one God, but it's not necessarily one God. You understand? We're not going to go further with that. Pantheism, pan is a Greek word for all. Again, theism is God. All is God. Everything is God. God is in the trees, in the stones, in the fish, in me and you. It's in the pulpit. All right? Everything is God. A very like a new age philosophy that God isn't a personal being that can have any influence on life. God is in everything. A very like new age philosophy. Polytheism is many gods. That will be first nowadays is like Hinduism. There's not many religions around the world today that actually adhere to many gods besides Hinduism. Many of the faiths adhere to a monotheistic religion. But back in the days of Abraham, everybody believed in other gods. Okay, that's why he was chosen from amongst the world as the only man that stood up against the polytheism of the day. He didn't believe that we should worship many gods, only one God. All right. But in that day, right through the New Testament even, when Paul goes on his missionary journeys, or every place he goes, there's many gods. The Romans had many gods, the Greeks had many gods. And here he was trying to preach to the people, no, there's only one God. All right, that's why he was persecuted. All right, so before we go on from Abraham, let's just quickly look at a couple of Hebrew names. The first one is Abram. So what does Abram mean? It means exalted father. Okay? Somewhere on your page, you can write these two Hebrew words. A-B, equals father. And Ram, R-U-M, is high or exalted. So Abram means exalted father or high father, anything like that. Who knows what his name was changed to? Abraham. So let's quickly turn to Genesis 17. Genesis chapter 17. And it will probably be verse 5. Let me just see. This is body bar. Can't even see. Okay, it's Genesis 17, verse 5. We're just going to read about Abraham and his name being changed. Verse 5 says, I wonder if I should read. We'll read from verse 5. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. So if you got a good NIV version like mine, I'll have two footnotes. My footnote at the bottom says Abraham means exalted father. You see that? So we're pretty happy with that. It comes from the two Hebrew words Ab and Ram. And then I've also got a footnote of the other one, Abraham or Abraham as we pronounce it. And my footnote says Abraham means the father of many. Do we have kind of the same thing? So, sorry? Father of many, father of multitude. Yeah, father of many nations, some people say. So Abraham means father of many nations. But the truth is, it doesn't. So scratch it out of your Bible. You got Tipex. Do you still get Tipex nowadays? It says in the word that his name was changed to Abraham, for he will be a father of many nations. But the word Abraham does not mean that at all. If you take the words father of many, father of multitude, father of many nations, and you change it to Hebrew, it does not come to Abraham. It comes to this, and I've actually written it down. Ab Hamon Goyim, father of the multitude. Ab, you can write it if you want to. Ab Hamon Goyim. So the word Abraham does not mean father of many nations. If his name did mean that, he wouldn't be Abraham. He would have been Ab Hayon Goyim. So why is it there? Because the Jewish language is very, very strict. The names mean something, always, from start to finish. If you got a name, it's translated as something. Let me give you an example. If you turn to the New Testament, to Matthew. Matthew is in the New Testament. We're going to see the rule of Hebrew displayed over here clearly and also in the rest of the Bible. It is only in the name of Abraham where this rule is either neglected or changed or overlooked. Matthew, and this is, if you're familiar with the Gospels, Matthew 1 will obviously be about the birth of Jesus. So we're talking about Jesus Christ himself. And it says this in verse 21. Matthew 1:21. So I want to show you that this is just one example of all the other examples in the Bible where it mentions a name and the meaning of a name. It says, she will give birth to a son and you will give his name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. And the footnote I have means Jesus comes from the Greek form of Joshua, which means the Lord saves. So the word Jesus comes from the Hebrew Yeshua. It means the Lord saves. And in this verse, he says that. He says, Jesus means the Lord saves because he will save his people. So it's a direct correlation. We're happy with that. When it comes to Abraham, it's not the same. It says you'll be called Abraham, and that's got nothing to do with being a father of the multitude. It's the only time in the Bible where that rule is neglected or changed for some reason. The word Abraham, according to good intellectual scholars, actually doesn't come from the word ab, father, for anything. It comes from two words, aber, which means shield or protection. So you can write that down for your own knowledge. Somewhere on the page, write A-B-E-R, aber. That means shield or protection. Again, could be spelled differently, A-R. And then the last one is A-M, and that means there. So Abraham, according to many linguistic scholars, means their protection or their shield. It has nothing to do with the father of many, father of multitudes, father of many nations. All right. Oh, yeah, as I said, that's just really for your own. But Ab is the first one. Second word is Hamon, Hamon, and Goyim, which is Goyim. That is the literal translation in Hebrew for father of many nations. So if you look at the original Hebrew, and you have to look at the words, it will say Abraham, and then Goyim, No, what is it? Hamon, Goyim. It will be completely different words. And it shouldn't be like that. In the Hebrew, it will be always the same. It will be, his name shall be called Jesus. His name shall be called Yeshua, because he saves his people. All right. Abram will be called Abram because he's a high father. It's always the same, except for this one time. So there, for all these many years, you were wrong. Maybe not completely wrong, but I'm just giving you the facts of the Bible. All right, so let's carry on to Isaac. Well, before we get to Isaac, Abraham married who? Sarah. So write Sarah on your page, and her name means princess. And I found that interesting too, because Sarai was changed to what? Sarah, yeah. But the names mean the same thing. They're not even altered. And it means princess. It comes from the Hebrew Sar, S-A-R. S-A-R in Hebrew is ruler or prince. And Sarah with an A on the end is a female version. A female ruler. A female princess. And Sarai and Sarah, it's the same words. It's just a play on the end, but they mean exactly the same thing. Which is interesting too, because it's there's no change to a name. I don't know why God changed it. It's just it meant the same thing. All right, and then they got married and they had a child called Isaac. All right, so let's read the next part. It says Isaac married Rebekah. Raymond was right there. He was a one-woman man, and his wife Rebekah was his cousin, and she was a descendant of Nahor, Abraham's brother. Incest, to a limited degree, was still very much in play. Abraham also married his half-sister. All right, Sarah was a half-sister of Abraham. Yeah, even Isaac married his cousin. So it wasn't direct incest, brother and sister, but there was family affiliations. It's like the tribes and clans kept it in-house. All right, all right. And for a time, eventually, God allowed this for a time, and eventually it was like kind of, one of the laws was not allowed to do that no more. Right? Let's stop all this incest story, but for a long time, God did allow it. Not direct incest, though, but in cousins and stepsisters and all that stuff. All right. One woman man, obviously, because like we know David, Solomon, and his couple of wives. So people had many wives during this time, but Isaac, no, one woman. All right. And Isaac, anybody know what that means? Isaac means to laugh. Laugh. Laughter. Comes from the Hebrews. It's actually because this is, his name means laugh because when God told him that he would have a baby, first Sarah was next door behind the tent and she laughed her head off. That'll never happen. I'm like, the old woman. I think I'm old. I'm like 50. She was like, oh, she said, that's not going to happen. And she laughed. And then Abraham also laughed in the context of the story. So the last laugh was on them because when the baby came out, he said, guess what your name's going to be? Laughter. To laugh. It comes from a Hebrew sahak. Isaac comes from sahak. And it means to laugh. Okay. So that's Isaac. And then after Isaac came Jacob. Jacob was the twin of Esau. God's favor and blessing was given to Jacob. His mother Rebekah sent him into exile to his brother Laban. That's an N at the end there, not a H. Laban. Jacob took Laban's daughters Leah and Rachel as his wives, so he had two wives. Their servants also bore Jacob's children. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and his 12 sons became known as the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jacob, as I said, we're going to be looking at the Hebrew names of these people. Jacob means to grab the heel. That's it. All right. Why? Because when he came out of his mother's womb, he grabbed the heel of his brother. All right. And that's why. So it was a very literal translation. In Hebrew, it's crazy because every name has a physical connotation and a spiritual one for Jacob himself. Um, sorry, no, I was going to say this. Jacob means to grab the heel physically because that's what he done. Spiritually, it means deceiver or supplanter. So you can write that also. All right. Spiritually, his name means deceiver. Norman. Oh, yes, yes, 100% right here. So there's always two, it'll always be a physical thing and a spiritual thing of every name in the Bible. All right, so his name means to grab the heel and then he's a deceiver, and we know he done that in his life. Esau, on the other hand, his brother, his name means to work or to do. And if you look at the life of these two gentlemen, Jacob and Esau, Esau was a go-getter. He was always out hunting, killing animals. He's a guy that would come home with blood dripping down his shoulders, of the animal around his shoulder, throw it down. His brother was not so much like that. He would be the guy in the house cleaning up, tidying up, doing the dishes, cooking a feast for the family. They had different temperaments, different styles. One was very much like a mother's boy. He would be in the house. Jacob would never be out hunting and stuff like that. He wouldn't get his hands dirty. He was not into that kind of a life. He was a guy that would be inside looking after the dishes and cooking and cleaning, and his brother would always be out in the fields. He has no time to come in. He would have no interest in cooking food or cleaning up anything. All right, so, and it doesn't mean that Jacob was in any way effeminate or homosexual or anything like that. It just means that his personality was more prone to do things like that. I'm the same, all right? I'm not a hunter. I'm not going to be out there. My wife will be the hunter, all right? I'm the guy that's also like, I like the light labor stuff, all right? I'm not into hard labor and hard duty stuff. So, I mean, it just shows different temperaments. But Esau, again, it means to work or to do. And Jacob's name was changed to Israel. This is also like a little bit of a controversial name because of what it means. The name originally comes from the Bible when Jacob was wrestling with the angel. All right. And in that he says, I've seen the face of God. So we can assume that from the context that angel was God. All right. He says, I've seen God face to face. And in that fight with him, he changes his name and he says, no longer will you be called Jacob, but you will be called Israel. And Israel, in a sense, does mean to struggle with God or to fight with God. That's where the name comes from. Isra and El. The El at the end of the name is God. The first part, Isra, to struggle, to fight, to restrain, to oppose, anything around there. So in the context, that sounds good because I would go with that. It means to fight with God, to struggle with God. But the name itself doesn't sound like great. You know what I mean? You don't want the name, I'll fight with God. That doesn't sound good. So there's another translation to this, Prince of God. And that sounds far better, doesn't it? So the other word is, and all they've done, they take the word Israel and they just split it up into different parts. So the other translation of Israel is Prince of God. Okay? And it's the same as Sarah. I told you Sarah comes from Sar, which means prince. That's where Israel comes from. Sar, El, Prince, God. Okay, so either one, I said Hebrew is a difficult language. First, remember they only have consonants, no vowels, and then every word you get is either a noun or a verb, and it goes like that all the time. So I thank God for the guys who put the English translations together. God bless them. They've given us such a wonderful book. But even within the English translation, there is a little thread of error running through it because of the original Hebrew. We had English translators who had to take the ancient manuscripts and do their best to translate those words. And sometimes they could have got it wrong. Okay. And it's the same with this. I mean, I think we're going to be flabbergasted if we ever go back to the original manuscripts. One day in heaven, God will show us all the original manuscripts in Hebrew. And I'm sure we're going to be blown away because maybe some of those things are not exactly what we have in our Bible. All right. And again, it's not that it's wrong. It's just that some of the translations could be a little bit different. As the name of Israel, we really don't know what it means. How can we not know what the name Israel means? All right, but we don't. All right. Just because of the way people put different vowels in and the way they split the words up, the name changes just like that. But I've given you the two that is most prominent. All right, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. He had 12 sons. His favorite son was who? Joseph. And what did he give him for a gift? Not a sweetie pie like Kathy gave me. He gave him a coat of many colors. And Jacob favored Joseph and he gloated over him. He was the apple of his eye and he gave him all the gifts. Why did he do that? Why was Joseph special? He came from No? Give me the right name. Rachel. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. Yes, yeah. So he had two wives. He fell in love with Rachel. She was like, the smoking hot woman, beautiful. The Bible says she was soft on the eyes, smoking hot. That's my translation. All right. She was beautiful, and he was flabbergasted. He was blown away, and he fell madly in love with her. But then he was tricked into marrying her sister, Leah. Leah, not so nice, all right? She wasn't not so smoking hot. So he had two wives. The one he loved was Rachel. And Rachel was barren. She couldn't have any children. So for many years, Leah had all the babies. She popped out babies. And then Rachel got a bit jealous and she said, okay, well, you can take my handmaid, my servant, and have babies with her, and then they'll be mine. And obviously he said, sure, why not? So he, as a man would. So he said, sure, why not? And then he went, and then Leah got jealous and then said, okay, I'll take my servant also. So again, he said, yes, sure, why not? And he carried on having babies all over the place. And eventually, later, Rachel finally gives birth. And she gives birth to Joseph. And that is why he gloated over him. This was the child of the woman he loves. He's been waiting for so many years for his true love to have a child that he could really call his own. He doesn't want these other servants' children and Leah's. He wasn't cared about them. He wanted Rachel's child. And Joseph pops out. And then after that, she has another child. Anybody know what his name was? Benjamin. The last of the 12 sons was Benjamin. And she has him in hard labor, and she actually dies shortly after giving birth to Benjamin. And when he's born, his name wasn't Benjamin. You know what it was? Benoni. Net soos die plek daar bo ergens. Benoni. It means son of my struggle. Ben is a Hebrew for son. So because she gave birth and she was struggling, she said, my son, Benoni, the son of my struggle. But then the father jumped in and said, no, he's not going to be called that. He's going to be called Benjamin. All right. And I will be honest with you, I don't really know what Benjamin means at this point, but you can look it up. I'm sure it doesn't mean son of my struggle. It means something better, like son of my right hand, or, it means it's a good, positive thing. All right. So there's the 12 sons. The last one was Joseph. Joseph was born from Rachel, father of the father's favorite son. This resulted in his brother jealousy and envy. They sold him into Egyptian slavery. And God miraculously protected Joseph, who after very trials and hardships became an authority in Egypt. He rose up to be like the prime minister of Egypt. And I know we also see that in the movies and in the Sunday school stories. It's kind of very quick. We see the coat of many colors, into slavery, and prime minister. But there's many years ago between that. And that's what we don't know. And that's why I encourage you always to read the Bible. There's so many beautiful things that happened in his life that led to that. And it wasn't just like that. He went to prison for many years. He was persecuted. He was falsely accused of assault on a woman, things like that. So he went through horrible trials and tribulations before he eventually became the prime minister. So again, preamble. It's not just coat of many colors, prime minister. There's a lot of hardship that happened in between that. It says a famine and severe drought drove Joseph's brothers to buy wheat and grain from Egypt. They did not recognize the Egyptianized Joseph, although he recognized them. And that was maybe because he lived in Egypt. He was prime minister. He was dressed like them. And the Egyptians shaved part of their head and they had makeup on. So he didn't look like Joseph. And the last time they saw him when he was a little wee kid thrown into the cistern. Now he's a mature man and he looks very differently. So they didn't recognize him, but he sure recognized them. And it says, a narrative has interesting twist, and Joseph and his brothers are reconciled. Again, we kind of know a little bit about that beautiful story. The brothers settle in Egypt, and their offspring become known as the tribes of Israel. After many years, the Egyptians made the Israelites their servants and slaves. The Pharaoh, at a time perturbed at the wisdom and growing population of the Israelites, decided that all Hebrew male infants should be killed. Infanticide followed, which is a killing of all babies. So Joseph and his family now lived. I think 70 of his family come down from Canaan. They settle in Egypt and things go well. Everyone's happy because the Egyptians welcome them in. Joseph's the prime minister. He's got them out of the drought. So everyone loves Joseph and his family and they let them stay there. But then after many, many years, they start to populate and they start to become a lot bigger than they were originally. And eventually one of the pharaohs pops up and he looks around and he just sees far too many Jews in his land. And he says, but they shouldn't be here. We are Egyptians and they don't belong here. So they got to move. So that's why he starts to kill them. And those he doesn't kill, he forces into manual labor. They become slaves. Right. And that's what actually leads up to this guy called Moses. So let's look at Moses. It says the birth of Moses and the circumstances relating to his miraculous rescue was an epoch event that changed the course of human history. Moses was of the Levite lineage. He was from the tribe of Levi, but at this time there was no real laws connected with the Levitical priesthood. So he was from that tribe, but from there he would move into the Levitical priesthood. His brother became Aaron, the first high priest. Okay, what does Moses mean? To draw out of the water. I don't know how they get a word like Moshe to mean to draw out of the water, but we'll go with it. Because he was taken out of the water. So again, I'm not too sure. You can look it up if you want a bit more history about it, because whether it means that or not, I don't know if Moses was an Egyptian name or was it a Hebrew name given to him by his mom. Why was he named Moses only after he was taken out of the water? What happened in 3 months before that? Did he not have a name? So I don't know. There are things that, for me, when I read about it, I question a lot of things. And that's kind of, so for now, we know that it means to draw out of the water because he was taken out of the water from the princess, the Egyptian princess. But again, there's other questions that kind of make me also maybe doubt that. All right. But it doesn't take away the fact that his name was Moses. Moses grew and developed and was educated as an Egyptian. God in his providence proposed that Moses received a great secular education and served to enhance his leadership. Moses escaped into exile and settled in Midian after Pharaoh saw fit to kill him for the murder of an Egyptian slave master in Exodus 2. While in exile, Moses is confronted with a burning bush and an encounter with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you can write next to Exodus 3 there, I am who I am, because that's what God's name was in Exodus 3. And although Moses was trained up in the Pharaoh's court and he should have had some leadership skills, I think he still lacked a lot of it, because even at the encounter with God in the burning bush, and even after that, he was a great leader, but definitely not the go-getter leader. He was very reluctant to go back and lead the people. He kept on complaining and using excuses that he couldn't speak. A leader needs to speak. And in fact, God actually chose Aaron to be the speaker. And he just led. Yes, no?
Believe that Moses had a stomach.
Yes, they say that, a defect in his speech. Yeah. So whatever the reason is, he originally he wasn't this guy that says, yes, I will lead the people. He didn't want anything to do with it. So much so that God said, okay, fine, I'll just call your brother. You'll do the talking, you just lead. And in hindsight, though, we know that he was a great leader. For me, he was a perfect servant leader. He wasn't this guy that came up there and showed his odds. He always led from the bottom. And it's just, in his personality, in the way he dealt with people, with the Israelites and his family, it just showed his heart was always humble. And that's what I love about him. For me, he's one of the greatest leaders because of his humility. Same as Jesus. Jesus was a humble servant. He was the servant king. He was a king of the universe, yet he humbled himself. And that's what I admire that in leaders. I don't like the Stalins, Hitlers, or Trumps, or these guys that are always in the limelight. I like leaders that lead from the ground up, through the people. All right, and he was one of those people. For me, he stands out like that. And he led for many, many years. He was 40 when he left Egypt, when he killed the slave master. So again, we assume that he knew he was a Hebrew. Also controversial. We don't know if he knew that he was a Jew or not. We can just assume he knew, because he saw someone beating up a Jew, and he said, this is my brother, and I will fight for him. And he killed the Egyptian. And then Pharaoh said, you've killed an Egyptian. God, you are going to be killed now. So he ran away and fled. All right. And the Midian, the people say it's either in the Sinai Peninsula, where Mount Sinai traditionally is now, or it was in Arabia. Arabia is across the Persian Gulf on the other side, Saudi Arabia. Paul in Galatians talks about being in Midian in Arabia. All right, so it's around that area, but it is a large area. So, it was away from Egypt. That's all we got to know. All right, so he went there and he stayed there for 40 years, and he lived a good life, and he got married to who? Who was his wife? For $500. Sure, that's a big number. I normally don't go that high. It's my birthday. I feel happy. I'll give you a sweetie pie chocolate. Moses' wife, Zipporah. Zipporah. And the only reason I mention it is because we know so much about Moses, but we know his wife. I would give you $1,000 to if you answer his two sons' names, but I won't do that. All right, he also had two sons with Zipporah, and his father-in-law was Jethro. So he lived there, and he settled down as a shepherd boy. Although he was 80 years old, he was a shepherd boy. And he had a beautiful wife, and he had kids, and he lived a good life there, all the way from Egypt. No interest in going back there, no interest of tying his roots back to the Jews. So he had two sons. Their name was Eliezer and Gershom. And then after that, he was 80 years old, and God was in a burning bush and said, you go back and fetch my people. And after reluctant complaints and excuses, he did. And then it says the plagues. The Egyptian plagues were God's judgment against all the gods of the Egyptians' worship. The Nile was considered to be the god of life, but he produced death. The Pharaoh and his firstborn were perceived as gods to be worshipped. The death of the firstborn was a divine act against the pharaohs of Egypt. So the only thing I want to comment on there is the fact that there were 10 plagues, divine judgments against the Egyptians. The connection and correlation to the gods of Egypt, I think, is just a stretch. I think it's just, there's no biblical evidence to support that. And there was more than 10 gods in Egypt anyway, so there should have been like 100 plagues. So I know that people try to connect the plagues to a certain god in Egypt, and it could be, but there's no real evidence to support that. It's just a nice look. It's just a nice thing to, oh yeah, it could be. But there's no evidence historically or biblically to support that. But the point is, there were 10 plagues. Last one was death of the firstborn. And then the commandments, it says, stringent and laws and regulations that God imposed by the Hebrews were given to discipline and unchain them from the culture of idolatry, so common in Egypt. They've been there for 400 years, and now it was time for them to get the commandments and the laws that govern them. This is also called the Mosaic law. Right next to that, law of Moses. All right, it's like a simple version of Mosaic law. The law of Moses. Exodus 20, right next to that, Exodus 20, right, Exodus 22:24. Because the commandments doesn't stop in Exodus 20. It actually goes on to 21, 22, 23, and 24. So people kind of, the 10 commandments is in Exodus 20. We know that. But don't stop reading it. If you carry on reading, it continues the laws that God gave to Moses. And I'm under correction, but if I'm not mistaken, there's another 155 laws after the 10 commandments. Okay, so it's not 10 commandments. It's 165 commandments. Right. So just read it in context. Read the rest of the stuff. And this all happened on Mount Sinai. God gave him the first 10 commandments, the people, and it was audibly, so everyone could hear. The Israelites said, please let God stop talking. Be very, very scared of him. I think Moses said, okay, God, can you rather just talk to me? And he did. And he continued to give him the rest of the commandments, which he eventually wrote in a book. At the end of Exodus, it says that Moses ratified the book. So it wasn't just 10 commandments on the tablet. They were there, and he also wrote a book with all the rest of the laws. All right, it says, Jesus did not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill the law. In Matthew, he says, do not think that I have come to destroy the law, the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill, complete. In a sense, to make one obsolete, not to kill and destroy, but to finish this chapter and to open a new chapter. That's what Jesus came to do. The law is fulfilled in the law of love. He says in John 13, a new commandment that I give unto you, to love one another as I have loved you, so you love one another. The law cannot justify the sinner, never could. It only showed them that they were sinners and they needed to repent. Galatians says, but no one is justified by the law in the sight of God is evident, for the just shall live by faith. That's why even us today, we are not justified or saved by the law. We are saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. And that is what Jesus was talking about. He came to fulfill the law, make it obsolete, nullify it, put it aside, and now we are saved through faith in him. Ephesians says, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is the law of commandments. So there we're talking about the commandments of God, the 10 commandments, the 613 laws of the Jews, contained in the ordinances, so that to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace. Ephesians is talking about the Jews and the Gentiles becoming one body. Okay, so that's what the comment then says. It says, through the work of the cross, Jesus abolished the enmity or the division between the Jew, they were the custodians of the law, always have been, always will be, and the Gentiles, who are those without the law, and make believing Jews and Gentiles one in Christ through faith. It says in Ephesians 2:18, for through him we both have access by the one Spirit to the Father. And that is it. So the commandments were there. They were governmental laws given by God to Israel because they were entering the promised land. All right, they've come out of Egypt, the Red Sea event, that we know what happened there. And I always like to comment on that Red Sea event also quickly, is the fact that people understand that as they were cornered by the mountains and the army was behind them, so they had to part the Red Sea to escape. That was not the reason for the Red Sea part. They could have escaped very easily without even crossing the Red Sea. They could have just walked down. The reason for the Red Sea crossing was not for the Jews to escape. It was for God to kill the armies of the Egyptians. And it's very clear in Scripture. So they parted the Red Sea. The Jews safely walked past. The only reason for that was when the Egyptian army came through, God then closed all the waters and they all died. So now the Jews were very, very free. They were very safe. They had no army chasing them. There was not going to be another army in Egypt for many, many years. So they could safely now wander down into the desert, which wasn't far from Egypt. They stayed at Mount Sinai for 11 months in peace and safety, with no worry about the Egyptians chasing them. Why? Because there was no army to chase them. So the Red Sea wasn't so they could escape. It was so God could kill the army, so they could be safe. All right. And they did. They spent 11 months getting the laws, commandments, building a tabernacle. And then after they got all the commandments, they decided it's time to go to the promised land. And they did. They went up north, a quick journey, a couple of days' journey up to Israel. And that was, God gave them the commandments because they were going to be entering in the land. So you're saying to the Jews, listen, these are your commandments. These are your rules that govern you with. Ceremonial laws, governmental rules, all these laws. Don't kill, don't murder, don't steal, don't touch anything, all those laws. He said, because you're entering into your land, these are the rules that must govern you with. And that is what the law was. It's the same as us today in South Africa. We also have laws. The laws that govern South Africa. It's the same thing as what God gave to them. We have a different set of laws in South Africa than the Jews had back in that day. We must understand that those laws were given to them and them only. We have no claim to it. We are not the custodians of the law of Moses. And what God done through Jesus Christ was he said, the Jews, you can't save yourself through the law. The Gentiles, you don't have the law anyway. So I'm going to make a plan that you can all be saved. I'm going to send you my son, Jesus. And Jesus came then to fulfill and nullify and make obsolete and make a new chapter and a new covenant and all those other things so that everyone now can be saved. All right. Any questions?